At a time of deep division in today's society, we must come together for humanity's sake. On Can We Talk 360, we strive to stimulate an authentic conversation on issues that affect all of us in an environment of tolerance. I am Eugene Pettis, attorney and community servant. Tune into our discussion to foster a greater awareness of yourself and others. Let's discover how there is strength in our differences and an abundance of possibilities when we stand together as one humanity. Welcome to Can We Talk 360. I'm excited with today's guest, Dr. Nilson Adams. You're going to find out Black excellence in action. Dr. Nilson Adams is a friend. He's a friend just not of me, but a friend of South Florida. He's been an obstetrician gynecologist for decades here in the Miami Shores, Miami area. And I'm going to go over that history, and I think it's going to be inspiring. This is at the end of Black History Month, and I thought it was only fit to touch someone who's really exemplified excellence, who happens to be Black. And Dr. Adams, welcome to Can We Talk 360.
Thank you so much, Counselor. It's always good to be with you, though, in the virtual space today. But you inspire us all. Thanks for what you have done and continue to do to serve all of mankind. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the areas I want to touch upon initially is really going back to your roots. I understand you were born in 1953 here in Miami, Florida.
Correct.
And graduated from one of the historic institutions of Miami, that's Miami Jackson High School. Is that correct?
That is correct. 1953 was actually the year I was born, and things were a little bit different then. Though I might add that the more things change, sometimes they seem to stay the same. I was born at Christian Hospital. It was a Black hospital. Yep, a Black hospital. It was administered by Blacks. The physicians were Black. The nurses were Black. The registration team was Black. And obviously, I was born, delivered by a Black physician, a graduate of Meharry Medical College. My pediatrician was a Black woman, the first Black board-certified pediatrician in the state of Florida, Dazelle Simpson, and the obstetrician was George Stiles. So 53 was the year, interesting times, and be happy to share more about that. And yes, I did graduate from the mighty Miami Jackson High School. It was something else back in the 60s. I graduated in 1970.
I was born in 60, and I was born in the only hospital where Blacks could be admitted at that time, and that was Provident Hospital here in Fort Lauderdale.
Similar story.
That was started by Dr. Mizell and I think Dr. Moorhead and Dr. Shirley were Moorhead birthed me, and Dr. Shirley took care of me from that point forward.
Wow.
Through all of my adolescent years. The community was.
If I could just add, it's interesting that you mentioned Dr. Shirley, Dr. Calvin Shirley. He had a brother who actually lived in Miami, who was a general surgeon and general practitioner as well, Dr. Edwin Shirley, who took care of my family for many years. And, I happened to have had the honor of meeting Dr. Calvin Shirley, a gentleman, a scholar, and physician extraordinaire.
One of the things, the community was different. I was here in Fort Lauderdale all my life. Before desegregation, the Black community was very cohesive and had everything you needed in your community. You had your grocery store, you had your doctors, you had your lawyers, you had your teachers. Everything was right here. And, while there have been some gains with broadening and opening up the community, there have been some detriment to it because you don't have that nucleus anymore. You have difficulty knowing where certain professionals are because they're all over now. And Miami is even bigger than Broward County. You got 2 million people here. Where are the Black doctors? I probably couldn't name more than 3 or 4 myself, and there are way more than that. You mentioned the times of the 60s, and as I was preparing to speak with you, what I was interested in is how did you get to the point of even being interested in going to Howard University, where you went to study zoology, obviously having in mind you wanted to be a doctor or a scientist of some sort. Tell me about that. Graduating from Miami Jackson, with honors. What was in your thought process? What was your vision at that point in time?
You know, as a youngster, uh, according to a paper that my mother kept forever, uh, when I was in second grade, the question that teachers would ask sometimes is, what do you want to be when you grow up? And my answer was, I wanted to be a doctor. One of the reasons was because I had been exposed to doctors. As I said earlier, I was delivered by a Black physician. My pediatrician, who I adored, was a Black doctor. So though my parents were both educators, my dad a school principal, my mother taught home economics, I felt a calling, if you will, even as a kid, towards medicine, because in medicine it was clear that you help people, and I thought that is something that I wanted to do. So I just sort of stuck with that, and took the right classes and did reasonably well. I was in the drawer, but I wasn't always the sharpest knife in the drawer. But I was able to graduate from Jackson, and I knew that I was obviously going on to college. The college of my family historically has been Tuskegee. My mother graduated from Tuskegee in 1940. She met my dad there. He actually graduated from Alabama State after having to go to the military and serve in the Second World War. But my sister went to Tuskegee, and she then married a fellow who lived in Tuskegee, but had gone to Howard University. That's the first time that I learned anything about Howard, and it was from my brother-in-law, 12 years older than me. He was kind, he was tall, good-looking, and spoke fondly about Washington, D.C. And as we can recall, in those days and up until very recently, D.C. was sort of the chocolate city, very different from South Florida, where we had a very diverse population, even back in the 50s and 60s. Though I might add, since this is Black History Month, and we're winding that up in the next few days. When I was a kid, if you heard someone speaking Spanish, you actually kind of stopped and looked. Fast forward to 2025, 75% of the population in Miami-Dade County is of Hispanic origins. And things have certainly changed as it relates to that. But the reason I ended up going to Howard was really, number one, because I didn't want to go to Tuskegee, because my sister lived there. I was trying to flex and separate and be independent. My dad had a great relationship with the president of the University of Miami at the time. So he was sort of leaning heavy that I stay at home under his watchful eye, I might add. I was somewhat of a rambunctious kid, not bad, but mischievous. And the old folk would say I was beginning to smell myself.
I've heard that term before.
And he wanted me to stay either here in Miami or go to Tuskegee. But Howard made lots of sense to me. It came down to two schools at the final decision. It was Boston University, because I had some friends who were in Boston, one at Harvard, another at Boston University, and I thought that might work. But it was really pretty chilly in Boston, and I thought that might not work for me. In addition, Howard was an HBCU. And I thought that might be a better fit for me. So Howard, it was. I had never seen Howard, had never been on the campus, only the catalogs. Back then, you'd get a big, thick catalog for the schools, and I'd read up on it and read about some of the folk who had gone, and thought that maybe, just maybe, it would be a good fit. Truth be told, it turned out to be just that.
That's awesome. You know, Howard being one of our top HBCUs, you hear conversations now, Dr. Adams, as to what's the value of these HBCUs? Why do we need them? Some of them are under financial distress, threats. I saw in Tennessee, one of the HBCUs I was not familiar with, the governor took out the money that they got, just obviously to squeeze it and put it in financial disruption and hopefully close it. Why HBCUs? What's the value that HBCUs bring to our society?
It's similar to the reason that we now understand that having a physician of similar background, culture, and um, mindset relates ultimately in a better outcome. Uh, it's clear that HBCU and the HBCU experience is very different from the PWI, or the predominantly white institutions. And because of that, oftentimes the stressors and the pressure that we find in unfamiliar surroundings is eliminated. Going to college in and of itself brings about significant changes, certainly for those who go to college away from home. And going to a place where the food that you eat is familiar, the voices that you hear are familiar, the love that you experience is familiar, clearly makes a difference. The reason that HBCUs are so important today is because the professional class, if you will, those who are educated and who are able to contribute in very significant ways to people of color, are more likely to have graduated from HBCUs, just the sheer numbers. And finally, Attorney Pettis, I think if you think about leadership and leadership development, the opportunities that you have in that setting, there's going to be a Black president of the student government. There's going to be a Black fraternity or sorority that you can very easily affiliate with, and the like. So it's a nurturing environment, much more nurturing environment, and that's exactly what young people need, particularly those who are leaving the home setting and going off to an unfamiliar place.
One of the things I'm the youngest of seven, and I was the only one in the family that did not go to an HBCU. And we're using that term for those that don't know, historically Black college and university and colleges. All of my siblings, 5 sisters and my brother, went to HBCUs. It got to me, and I was headed to Bethune-Cookman. University of Florida had offered me a scholarship, and I said, I don't want to go. And of all the places I picked, I applied to every HBCU that I knew and got into several of them, but I went with the familiar. And literally, my aunt, who just passed away at 102 a year ago, lived right across the street from Cookman.
Wow.
I look at that now and say, why would I want to go to school where my father's sister is literally a rock's throw across the campus? And a gentleman came up to me at my girlfriend's house and said, I hear you have a scholarship to University of Florida. Why don't you want to go? I said, too many white students. He said, how many Black students do you need? I said, I don't know. He said, there's 1,800 of us. He said, what's your other issue? I said, too big. He said, every day you're on the campus, it gets smaller. I went home that night, Dr. Adams, and said, Mom, I want to go to University of Florida. It went back to my counselor at the school. He had to call the University of Florida, and Mr. Boatwright there said, send him up. I went up sight unseen, and It was just where God wanted me to be. I mean, to look at how my life went from there, it's just that gentle touch.
Sure.
Nope, you're going in the wrong direction. I've never seen that gentleman again. It was 1 minute of my life that changed my life.
And to that point, that's what we refer to as divine intervention. That was not serendipity. That wasn't an accident. That wasn't something that was accidental. That was planned. And look at you now. And because of those experiences, and what's so interesting is that you had that experience, but your passion for all things melanated is palpable. So thank you for that experience that helped make you who you are today.
It's an incredible. I look back on it with affection, and no question, you see God's hand on me through that time and obviously beyond. So you finish up Howard, and then you leave one historic institution and you go to another, and that's Meharry Medical College. Tell us about Meharry.
Let me begin by simply saying that I applied to Meharry, to Howard, to the University of Florida, University of Miami, and one school that was really off the beaten path, and that was State University of New York in Buffalo. And I didn't get in Howard, first of all, and that was disappointing. In fact, I knew the dean. The dean of the School of Medicine actually had been a classmate of my mother's at Tuskegee, Dean Marion Mann. I knew his son. His son and I had pledged one of the great fraternities. We won't stir that boat too much.
We don't have enough time for that.
Right. That's a whole nother. We'll have to do another show on that, the Divine Nine, if you will. But the long and short of it is, I didn't get into Howard, didn't get into the University of Miami. Got a call back at the University of Florida, but didn't follow through on that. Got into the State University of New York, Buffalo, but had an interview there in February in Buffalo, and it was like this. Using an old Southern term, this dog won't hunt. This was just not going to work for me. And I got accepted at Meharry Medical College. We talked about divine intervention a moment ago. I had done okay at Howard. I didn't have a stellar. My grade point average in the sciences was pretty good, but my overall grade point average, and I'll share this with the listening audience, was just under 3.0. It was 2.999, thereabouts. But because I hadn't done so well in classical mythology and in French, I just didn't. But my science average was good. Long and short of it is, I got accepted in a special program at Meharry. It required me to start, there were 15 of us, to start earlier than the regular class. We were coming in June. The regular class was going to start in August, to give us some prep time, if you will. So the reason that I went to Meharry is, number one, it's one of the two places I got in. The other one was just not going to work for me. Second, it recognized that they talk about a diamond in the rough. I was more like a piece of coal. But they figured they could work with me. But that happened. Here's the divine intervention. Because the chair of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, Dr. Henry Foster, had previously lived in, full circle, Tuskegee, Alabama. Wow. He had delivered my sister's children and had a great relationship, both socially and professionally, with my brother-in-law. They happen to be fraternity brothers, and my sister. And she put in the proverbial good word for me. And so when the application came through, and he said, "Oh, that's Siva Holland's brother," pull that aside, because I think just knowing the family, he didn't know me, but I know the family, that he's somebody who we'll be able to work with. And that's really how I ended up at Meharry. And what a blessing it was for me. It wasn't necessarily an easy path, but it was a path that I think was designed, orchestrated, prepared, especially for me.
As I hear you, and we don't pause enough with each other to really get to know, each other's history. What you just talked about was so similar to mine. I told you how I got into the University of Florida. For law school, I had to go through what's called the CLEO program. It's a summer program. I had a conditional admission, but I had to go to all places. CLEO is at different places every summer. A 6-week program. I was in Oxford, Mississippi, at the University of Mississippi.
Wow.
And I had to pass that program in order to start. And I got in because I had fought like heck when I pledged. My GPA crashed, and because I pledged my freshman year, the first fall semester, because I was there in the summer of 78. I pledged in the fall, and the impact on my GPA cut it in half.
Sure.
And then I lost my girlfriend to a tragic accident. That cut it in half. And I worked like heck to push it up. And I had enough trappings around me of leadership and excellence outside the classroom and okay in the classroom, that the dean facilitated. I would go to him every week, every month, say, "Hey, I'm really interested in coming over here. he knew that I wanted to come to law school. And I made that known to him. What do I need to do? And finally he said, I'm gonna give you a shot, but you need to go through Clio. And to think that boy who went through that path became the president of the Florida Bar just tells you there's more to it than a GPA.
Absolutely.
And I tell that story because you don't have to be, as you say, the sharpest knife. You have to be determined. You have to be willing to work. You have to be resilient. And those are criteria that can't be measured by a test.
So true. And and to add to that, and to recognize, I think both of us have experienced enough of this thing called life to know that favor isn't fair. And when favor comes your way, it's then about stewardship. That's why you've excelled in all of these. That's why you're doing a podcast. That's why you ended up being in the hierarchy of leadership in the Bar Association. That's why you and I and so many others that you've had on this show and people that we know recognize how important it is to have a good head. That's important. How important it is to have hands that don't mind working. But most importantly, and the reason I couldn't say no when you asked me to participate today is because of your heart. It's a heart that cares, a heart of compassion, a heart that recognizes that to whom much is given, much is not only expected, but required of us. And to know that we didn't get here on a straight path. It was very serpentine. And because of those experiences, me in a special program that kind of tested me and helped to mold me and to make me prove myself, yours a similar path and we didn't know this. It's interesting that we both experienced that same kind of thing. But that challenge gives you even more resolve that yes, I can, that yes, I will attitude, and to know that didn't happen just because you were tall and dark and handsome. It happened because it is a divine assignment on our lives. So wow. We can have church now in a minute.
No, you're preaching truth, and I agree. Meharry, I just wanted to note, was founded in 1876 and provided medical education and care to former slaves and their children. I mean, that's a deep, long history of putting out doctors from 1890 to the end of World War I. Almost 2,400 physicians graduated from Meharry and Howard universities. In late 60s, early 70s, 83% of all African American physicians had been trained at Meharry or Howard. That's just amazing success. And around 80% of Meharry's graduates work in underserved communities, which gets into, I think, the culture of HBCUs develop that community, that culture, that center of community, and go back and help those from which you come. And that statistic jumped out at me when doing some preparation for you, that Meharry is so grounded in giving back.
Absolutely. Meharry went out, as you said, in 1876. In fact, in a year and a half now, 2 years, we will celebrate our sesquicentennial. That's our 150th anniversary. Really excited about that. Meharry was good to me and continues to be good to me and to so many. Those doctors I talked about earlier, both Dr. Simpson, my pediatrician, and the obstetrician that delivered me were Meharry graduates. I find it so very interesting that the founding of Meharry, and this is just a tidbit since it is Black History Month, Meharry was founded in a very interesting way. The story goes, we call it the salt wagon story. Apparently there was a white fella, young guy, going through Kentucky, and his wagon broke down and stuck, wheel cracked, all kinds of things. And in the distance, he saw a little light flickering. He went there, and it turned out that it was a black family. This is at a time when white guy at your door in the middle of the night, saying he wants to come in, you got to kind of think twice about
Exactly.
it. But they let him in, found out what his story was. He spent the night. The next morning, they helped him get his wagon fixed, and he went on his way. And he said, I can't really do anything to help you people today, but I promise that when I can, I will do something to help your people. Fast forward several decades, he and his brothers, the Meharry brothers, came together and established a school to educate Negroes in the health sciences. That's the beginning. It was not called Meharry at the time. It was called the Central Tennessee School for Blacks. That college then took on the name of Meharry, and since 1876 has been producing doctors and dentists and nurses. And there was a time when we had techs. Now it has 5 schools, not only medicine and dentistry. No longer has nursing, but it does data science now. We have just stood up a school of global health, and we have a graduate school. We put out a significant number of PhDs every year of color, and for that we're so very, very proud. So I'm glad to be a Meharry.
And you have served on the board. Am I correct? You're on the board of Meharry?
You know, what an amazing opportunity it was. It still is an humbling and clear honor for me to do so. I've been on the board now for just under 20 years. And for the last 7 years, I've actually served as chairman of the board. I serve as chair of the board, and that gives me great joy. It's a tremendous responsibility, and particularly at a time such as this, when the challenges are coming daily in terms of how to make sure that we're able to provide the environment and have the resources that are sorely needed by those who attend. I don't have to tell you how costly education is, both at the undergraduate level and certainly at the professional level. Our students are leaving Meharry now with an average debt of $250,000. Some almost double that because of the undergraduate debt burden that they have. And so the need for support of student scholarship is so very important. That's a real challenge for not just Meharry, but for all HBCUs, because we, unlike some of the larger institutions, don't have the direct pipeline of state support necessarily. And on top of that, we clearly don't have the endowments that many of the PWIs have. And the endowments are what really give schools the juice. It allows them to have some unrestricted funds. And if their spend rate is such that what they can use from those endowed funds will help to sustain both operations, but more importantly, scholarships.
Our youngest daughter, Alexis, Pam's youngest, and we have 4 girls together, is in her 4th year. She has like 2 more months in her 4th year of medical school.
Oh, wonderful. I did not know that. Congratulations.
Yeah,
wow.
She's at Indiana University in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
Looking to do OBGYN.
Really?
Family medicine. She really wants to do OBGYN because she likes surgery.
Sure.
She's going to make a great doctor because of her compassion. Pam was just telling me last night that the ER physician who she worked under one of her rotations a couple of weeks ago, wrote her beautiful recommendation and said, "You sure you don't want to do ER work?" And she's had that message given to her every step of the way, which just tells her work ethic is off the chart. I mean, she's so committed.
Well, she got it honest. I mean, I don't know if you know her parents, but I do, and she couldn't help it. It's by default.
Exactly. One of the things that I wanted to highlight, because you've lived a life of service, and for that service that you've given to Meharry, I know they recognized you over the last month. I can't remember the name of the recognition, but they showed appreciation of you for all you've contributed to that institution. but you didn't stop there. You left Meharry and you went over to Mobile, Alabama to get your private practice started. Is that correct?
It is correct. But, prior to that, I did do a residency in obstetrics and gynecology at Emory in
Right.
Atlanta. Interesting time as well. From there, I did go to Mobile, Alabama, though. And folks sometimes say, why in the world would you do that?
And you just reminded me, I know it, but it was interesting times when you're coming through in the 60s and the 70s. You're a Black doctor going into your residency and want to go out into the broad community. How was that? What was your experience with that? What were the challenges?
Well, I can tell you this. In the 70s, Emory and Grady Hospital, similar to Broward General in Broward County and the Jackson Hospital in Miami-Dade County, are safety net hospitals. Just prior to me becoming a resident at Grady, it was brought to my attention that they used to call it the Grady's because it was segregated. There were Black wards and white wards. And only a few years before I got there, that was still in existence. I found it to be a very challenging time, to be quite honest with you. I was one of two Black residents in obstetrics, and those numbers were similar in the other specialties. And most of the patients, however, served were Black. And very few of the nurses were Black. The few that were very supportive of us. All of the cafeteria workers were. All of the housekeeping staff were Black. And those are the folk who actually gave you the proverbial pat on the back, the attaboy, attagirl, I'm so proud of you, that kind of whisper, that make sure that when you went through the cafeteria line, you really got
An extra helping.
extra helpings. And suffice it to say that dealing with that challenge of what was sometimes overt, but clearly covert racism, helped to make us stronger. We really did have to be smarter, work harder, go the extra mile to be recognized. And unfortunately, I think I shared earlier that in some situations, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And what we're experiencing in 2025 is clawing back so many of the gains, if you will, that we as a people, after dealing with the Middle Passage and 400 years of slavery and a little hiatus called Reconstruction for 10 or 11 years when it looked like everything was actually heading in the right direction. We had Blacks who were holding high office, senators
and congressmen. And
absolutely. We even had a interim governor, Pitchback, for a short while. So lots of things were happening. And then James Blackburn showed up. You may know him as Jim Crow.
That's exactly, that was the response to Reconstruction.
Yeah. And unfortunately, some of the things that we're experiencing today have a familiar ring. Maybe, just maybe, we've actually been here before. But we are resilient, and the we shall overcome rises up in us.
Exactly. One of the things, and if you look at it historically, it's really telling. And the belief, I can only imagine the belief of those that were there in the Reconstruction period from 1865 to it was about 10 years. And the success was astonishing. In such a short period of time, there were 2,000 Black elected men at that time, at every level. There were 200 and something in state houses, 16 in Congress in a short period of time. And what I've described as the recalling effect.
Mm-hmm.
Every single time Black folks have made gains, they're pulled back. And we're in one of these recalling times now.
Sure.
And I've done podcasts on DEI and all of those excuses. One of them I did say, what are they afraid of? Because the statistics doesn't ring an alarm that they're threatened. The top 500 corporations, 98 point something percent are still white males.
Sure.
You know, you got a couple that you can count on your hands and have some fingers left of black CEOs of the top 500 and 100. It's all a hoax as to why they're trying to get rid of it. Not because of the fact that somehow we've taken over and we got 50% or a disproportionate share of our participation in corporate America and society in general. But that recalling effect is real, and we're observing it now, not asimilar to what we've seen in the 60s and beyond. And it's our challenge, and it's a challenge that our foreparents, our grandparents, with less resources, stood strong and fought back on. And we have the same thing.
Yeah, and to that point, I think maybe during the period of Reconstruction, folk thought we had arrived and it was going to be that way forever. And to a great degree, I think we post the Civil Rights era and the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of the mid-60s, we actually had fairly smooth sailing for a while, and the trajectory was actually upward. There's an African proverb that I think speaks to times like that, and it simply says, just because the water is calm doesn't mean that the crocodiles have gone. And so those crocodiles are back, and they're not so subtle. I mean, they're you know, what's so interesting is that you know, I'm sure you've talked on other podcasts about what was written in the Project 2025 piece and all of that. But folks said what was going to happen. You know, it's just that, you know, we thought the water was calm. That ain't going to happen. That's just talk. That's not real. And even when it was denied that some folk knew about it, obviously they did, and they're following that playbook. So, but your point is so well taken. We've been there before. We are resilient, and a big part of that is something that both you and I share, and that's faith. I just don't believe that God has brought us this far to
leave
us to fail. He's never failed to shed. Great is His faithfulness.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and just as you know, mom, dad, grandparents, and great grandparents had to stand on that faith. That's all they had.
That's
they
it.
had no power. They had no office. They didn't have podcasts. They didn't have
Sure.
doctors.
Sure.
Lawyers were few in between, and that faith brought them through. So one of the things I'm doing, as you know, with the Black Men to Men Alliance is to aggregate our power and work together, as opposed to staying out singularly and trying to do things individually. Individuality is important, but in times like these, we need to come together in a strategic way. That
effort, I might say, for those who are unfamiliar, has been, in a short period of time, super impactful. There are people who talk about that in the places we need them to talk about it, in the barbershops and in the churches and on the parks, about the kinds of frank conversations, you know, that and even the name of this show, Can We Talk?
Yeah,
that's what it's about. We are a verbal people. I mean, you know, it's good to say, fine, go read this, but you know, oftentimes that just doesn't happen.
right.
The sources of information that we have are not always the best, but I really applaud you taking the bull by the horn. To whom much is given, much is required. You've stepped up to the plate. And thank you so much for doing that on so many levels, a professional level, but it's all about communicating with not just some of us, but all of us.
Thank you. And in order to make this successful, I have to have people like you willing to give up your time to tell your story. So I truly appreciate that. Let me transition. One of the challenges, we're going to talk about healthcare disparity. And one of the challenges I know from Alexis being in school and doing healthcare disparity summits that I've done over the last couple of years at the 20 or so churches I've done them at, are the numbers of Black doctors are so few. I see 5.5, under 6%.
Sure.
So few to our population.
Sure.
And one of the things I've seen, and I'm interested in your experience from the inside and being in the space, is so many of our people, for example, at church, they don't know how to advocate. They don't know how to consume healthcare. They go and they couldn't tell you what the doctor said or what's next. And they believe and that the white doctor said it, he's right, and I'm just whatever he says. And I do medical malpractice. I do it all day long, and I can tell you that's a dangerous assumption. Just had a meeting this morning with some new clients. They went in he had cancer in the upper lobe, and it was going to be removed. And it turned out his friend doctor took out the wrong lobe. So not only did you take out the wrong lobe, you've lost the large lobe. Now you have to go and take out the other lobe, and the poor guy is on oxygen, and his whole life is changed. Like, my question is, how can that happen? But one of the areas that pop up in are having doctors that appreciate our diseases, our medical challenges. Sickle cell anemia, for example. I just turned on a case a week ago of a 20-year-old girl that the real crisis happened in Indianapolis, not here at Cleveland Clinic, Stewart. So there was no case here, but she died unnecessarily in Indianapolis, 20 years old, for sickle cell. They didn't appreciate what sickle cell was in 2024. 2025 when it happened. It was early in January. How do we get more doctors? How do we address that problem of lack of Black doctors in our society?
Gene, it's multifactorial. Part of it is a pipeline issue. The whole notion I shared with you that I kind of made a soft decision that became more solidified as I advanced in the second grade, that I wanted to be a doctor because I had been exposed to doctors, and I got on that track. The pipeline is broken, and in some situations, I might say non-existent. So it doesn't begin when you finish high school and all of a sudden you say, I want to be a doctor. You've got to take the prerequisites so that you're ready to take the right courses, et cetera, et cetera. So one of them is a pipeline issue. Second piece is the tenacity that's required. It's a long haul. It's a long process. So it's not only the 12 years of high school and 4 years of college and then 4 years of medical school and then a residency program. And then on top of that, it costs a lot of money to do all of that. So you spend a lot of time, weren't making much money, and now you've got this debt burden, and now you hit a challenging profession that is, as you know, in the legal profession and in all professions, is not always kind or nurturing or welcoming, particularly for those who phenotypically are different. And so, on one hand, we don't have enough physicians of color because of that, those deterrents. The second piece is not only the sheer numbers, with about 14% of the population, maybe 5% in some studies, but it's closer to being about 3%. In fact, there are fewer Black males in the first year class of medical schools across the board than there were when I was a first year medical student in 1974. Now, that's a tragedy. That's a real wake-up call. But some of it is because of those numbers. And on top of that, what makes it even worse is the maldistribution of physicians. We're all in Atlanta or the big cities, the rural health. I mean, nobody's going there. the specialties. Howard and Meharry boast that many of our graduates do choose to serve in underserved communities. That's not the case for all of us, though.
Right.
And we need folk everywhere. We need primary care physicians. We need specialists. We need folk in the city and in the country. We need them everywhere. But there is a maldistribution on top of that. So we've got a number of issues. And one of the things that makes the difference, I think, it certainly made a difference in my life, though we didn't call it that at the time, but it's mentorship. If folk can see it, they may be able to believe it and then achieve it. You see it, it's then conceive, you then believe it, then you achieve it. I think that there's a lot to that.
Do you think there's any benefit to telemedicine that, you could have your office in the city if that's where people tend to want to go, but have a day where you can do telemedicine in the rural area? Sure. So they can, some of these people have to drive 2 or 3 or more hours to get to a doctor.
Sure. And absolutely, the short answer is yes, well, for sure. And many of us have embraced that. All of the medical schools have training in telehealth now. They're using mobile vans to do dentistry in rural settings and all of these type of things. But it takes all of that. And even then, and what's so alarming, Gene, as you know, our country spends more money than most folk on healthcare. Yet we are in the lowest of the lowest tiers in terms of health outcomes.
Right.
That's a problem, and some of it's because of the way that healthcare is delivered, and some of it is because of our attitude. Some of it is personal choice. So I don't let us off the hook either. But it is the effort of those who know better to share and to hopefully encourage and inspire and enable those who don't know how to live healthier lives. We still smoke too much and drink too much and party too hard, don't get enough rest.
Yeah. And it's a multifaceted problem. I mean, you look at what people eat. And they eat what they can afford in many instances. They eat what's in their neighborhoods. I live on the beach. You don't see Kentucky Fried Chicken over there. You go to where I grew up here, a mile from here, those are the things that are accessible. Fortunately, I came up in a family that mom cooked a meal every day. Sure. And we had balanced meals. You chaired an event here. It's been for the last 3 years, Black Health Summit. That's been held the last 3 years at Florida Memorial. Again, one of our only HBCUs here in South Florida and one of the 3 in the state of Florida. And it was in conjunction with Urban League, Florida Memorial, as well as Sigma Pi Phi Boulé, Alpha Rho chapter here. I want to ask you, given that background and the excellent discussions and panels that you all have had over the last 3 years, when you look at the healthcare disparity, one that always troubles me in 2024, 25, that there's been no improvement on maternal fetal deaths. I mean, maternal deaths in giving births. Black women for a century. I have an article that in 1915, over 100 years ago, 1915, that Black women were 1.8 times more likely to die with childbirth than white women. The more recent studies that I've seen of the current years is 2.5 times.
That's right.
We've gotten worse.
That's right.
Over 100 plus years. Why is that? Why, with all the money we have, as you've mentioned, that we spend on healthcare, why are we still seeing that significant disparity in maternal medicine?
It causes me to scratch my head. I struggle with it. First, let me say this. People really don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Part of it is health caring. The second is that even when you take into account education and zip code and insurance cards and all of that stuff. Even when you take a professional uh, Black person and compare them to somebody who was a high school dropout, one being white, the high school dropout, and one being the highly educated, high socioeconomic status, the Black person, we still find that disparity. And so suffice it to say that it makes us have to believe that there is something else at work. Perhaps something intrinsic, but more likely something extrinsic or a combination of both. It's something, and I'm going to say this word softly because I don't want to disturb some of your listeners, but it could have something to do with racism. Which leads to stress. And stress is manifested in many ways. The two reasons that women die, and it's classified a maternal death, is because of hypertensive issues and bleeding. And those are things that can usually be controlled. The other factor I will say, and I talked about health caring a minute ago, and that's about sensitivity. First being culturally sensitive, then being culturally competent, and then having cultural humility. All of those are terms that can be delved into, but the sensitivity is obvious. You got to be sensitive. You got to care. You got to have a heart of compassion. The competence means that you've got to try your best to understand, meet people where they are, so that you better communicate and they're more likely to be compliant with and adhere to the recommendations that you make as a healthcare provider. Doctor, by the way, means teacher, so that's really what doctors need to do. And the last piece is cultural humility. Oftentimes, we as physicians think we have all the answers. We know exactly what's best, and we, because of that, unfortunately, talk too much instead of listening more. Got two ears and one mouth, the old folk used to say. So we need to listen twice as much as we talk. And we learn in medical school early on, when you are doing a history and physical, that you have got to listen to the patient. Oftentimes they'll tell you what's wrong with them if you just listen. And it doesn't require all the labs, all the imagings, all of that. If you just listen, the answer is right there, but we don't listen. And we oftentimes have biases. Let me give you an example. When I was an intern, we were trained, a little different between education and training, but we were trained that if a woman came to the emergency room and had belly pain, and the woman was of lower socioeconomic status, and particularly if that woman were of low socioeconomic status and Black, that pain was almost for sure going to be a sexually transmitted disease, gonorrhea, most likely, pelvic inflammatory disease. That same patient happened to be white and or of a higher socioeconomic status, it was more likely to be endometriosis. And you would treat accordingly. Now, that was across the board. That was the Black residents, the white residents. Everybody got trained that way. And so sometimes the training in and of itself is biased. And so often we don't know what we don't know. And we do it just because that's the way we always did. It's multifactorial.
Yeah, and Alexis, sorry for interrupting, but Alexis brought that up, that she challenged her professor in the middle of medical school, saying, why is it that all of the examples you're teaching us on are white males? You don't teach on any people of color, very few women, period. It's white male. And we know the difference of presentations between the genders. You know the difference in presentations between the races. But I started my healthcare disparity summit because my practice is representing people who have had untoward events, typically in healthcare. Something tragically has gone wrong, a family member has died, they've been harmed, etc. I get tired of seeing it disproportionately with people of color. And one case, just to be example, the lady was a 30-year nurse at Imperial Point Hospital, one of our public hospitals, a 30-year nurse who had sickle cell anemia. It became debilitating, so she had to go from the clinical to the administration. She was in a crisis. She had to go back to the hospital 4 times, ER. And they said in the record, you're having a sickle cell trait.
Mm.
The woman is saying, I'm in crisis.
Wow.
They sent her home 3 times. When they finally get her back, she gets back to the hospital the 4th time. They find out she's clearly already been in sickle cell crisis, and her blood is now 70% clotted.
Sure.
She dies. She
No,
dies in her own hospital
sure.
because they were talking about trait, even though if they looked in their interconnected record system, she was at Coral Springs Hospital in 14 for sickle cell crisis.
Sure.
It wasn't a trait. This
Sure.
woman in this system had already been treated. And you see those stories over and over and over and over.
Over and over again.
Over and
and
over.
it really troubles. It's troubling.
It's troubling. You have been a OBGYN for how long?
Since 1978.
Okay. And so that'll put you at...
Well, let me take that back. I started my residency in 78. I finished my residency in 82. So
82.
40 plus years.
40 plus years. How many babies have you delivered?
More than 10,000. I've delivered the good, the bad, and a few of the other ones too, James.
Are you still going to do both gynecology and
I'm done. You caught me on a day. I come to the office now 1 day a week. I see a few GYN patients. I delivered my last baby about a year ago. I'm not doing major surgery anymore. There's something that I reference. We see it on food products and the like as a best if used by date. I think mine is has been achieved. Still good at what I do, but because of the field that you're in, you know that you can have bad outcomes even when you do things right.
No question.
And that doesn't keep you from having to go through the process. And
right.
I've been through that process, and it's not fun. So I'm done. But I continue to see GYN patients, and I continue to advocate through the Health Foundation of South Florida, Black Health Summit, through the med school. I chair the board of Sunshine Health also, which is a large managed care company in the state of Florida. Started as a very small entity that was acquired by a publicly traded entity, Centene Health, and now is a major player in healthcare delivery. Not perfect, but certainly has the right heart, head, hands, heart's the most important.
That's important. One of my biggest challenges is getting on the phone to tell someone who's lost a loved one that I'm sorry for your loss, but I don't see medical negligence. And I do it because I'm not going to take a case. And I tell them, for me to drag you through litigation when your chances of success is nil is a disservice to you. Or to put you in a case where all you have is a claim against North Broad Hospital District, which has a $300,000 cap, or Jackson, $300,000 cap, and you have a loss of a child. After expenses, after attorney's fees, you're not going to get anything out of it. I'm not recommending that for you. And those are hard conversations because there is some healing that goes on through litigation, but there's also stress that comes along with it. So I know it firsthand. Dr. Adams, it's been a pleasure. As I said off the record, I was going to interview you for my podcast in 2021, and due to my health, I had to cancel. But thank God we had a chance to connect in this day, this year. And you're an inspiration to so many people, including myself. And I thank you for your service. And I could not have scripted a better person to cap what I think Black excellence look like.
Let me, if I could, just in closing too, and I know time is well spent. But first of all, thank you. Really, thank you for what you do. You do it from the right place. The reason that you do what you do is to help all of us, Lottie Dottie and everybody. Good is a wonderful thing. You've already checked that box. You even checked the better box. But let me encourage you to don't grow weary in well-doing. For in due season we will reap if we faint not. So make that good become your better and your better become your best. And to the listening audience, let me remind you to do the same and do it this way. Good, better, best. Never ever let it rest not until your good and my good and our good becomes our better and our better becomes our best. Thank you, sir, for having me as your guest. This is a great honor for me to be a part of this movement, if you will, that you've established in communicating with the least of us. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adams.
The law firm of Halitzer, Pettis & Schwam is a proud sponsor of the Can We Talk 360 podcast. Our firm handles medical malpractice, wrongful death, and catastrophic personal injury litigation. We pride ourselves in being advocates for justice on behalf of those who have been seriously injured. For decades, we've taken the lead in making your case our priority. It's who we are. It's who we'll always be. Halitzer, Pettis & Schwam. Serious injuries, proven results.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Can We Talk 360. I sincerely hope that you were inspired to seize this moment in time and take real action towards change. Remember, all change begins with a conversation. Be sure to tune in every month for more fascinating discussions and motivational food for the soul. Please share with your friends, family, and colleagues. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Can We Talk 360, and visit us on the web at www.canwetalk360.com.